Spoilers. Spoilers everywhere. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modcast, episode 43.
Whoa!
Yeah.
That's 43 episodes of things and stuff. What are our names? My name's Slime.
Okay, Slime, sure. Just, breaking the rules, breaking the
I'm
mold.
breaking the rules. We don't have no order.
I'm Wodge.
I am Groot. And I'm Lego Master.
Here we go, talking about the Guardians of the Galaxy. This is the second one, not the first one, even though I guess we could have talked about the first one at some point in an episode.
We might have briefly covered it in the Civil War episode, because we did kind of talk a lot about Marvel in general.
Yeah, I wasn't there for that one, because I am not really into the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff, but I find that Guardians of the Galaxy is a really great gateway into the Marvel films, since it doesn't really connect yet with a lot of the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff.
I absolutely agree. Guardians of the Galaxy was actually the first Marvel movie that I watched.
Really? Slime, just out of curiosity, were you aware of the MCU before 2014 when Guardians 1 came out? Or
I was to a certain extent, but because I don't watch many movies, I just never watched, any of them.
Oh yeah, actually, now that I think about it, it was also my first Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, because I watched Iron Man 1 later, so I was trying to get into it. I still haven't gotten into it, by the way. I'm just I'm just too lazy to watch them.
To be fair, there is a lot of movies at this point.
I hear that certain ones are pretty good, like Captain America 2 and I guess
Captain
the Avengers.
America 1. Don't forget Captain
Is America 1 good?
I think it's great.
I really enjoy Cap 1, but talking about the Marvel movies on the internet is kind of a weird thing just because they're so huge and there's so many different people talking about them, but you still get some general kind of trends in the community. And yeah, the trend is that Cap 2 is apparently really good. Cap 1 is kind of lame. I think they're both awesome, but it's one of those weird things where you're going to get a lot of different opinions just in all sorts of different corners of the internet.
Going off that idea that, there are trends that the Marvel movies seem to have, and, people have a lot of differing opinions on it. I've heard that, as well, this movie was kind of divisive, apparently. I don't know. I thought the movie was good, but not super great. I mean, the Guardians movies are fun, comedy, adventure romps, That's what they are.
That's pretty much every Marvel movie, really.
I would tend to disagree. I feel like the Guardians movies are especially self-aware, and they really push the humor up.
Okay, yeah, they are sillier than most of the others.
They are definitely tilted more towards comedy than, say,
Winter
Man
Soldier?
2 or Winter Soldier. Yeah, they are definitely more action-oriented. They're definitely more comedy-oriented. So there's a little bit of variety. But I get your point where there isn't a Marvel movie yet which is completely humorless.
But at the same time, I feel as though Guardians also has a lot of action. The difference is that there's a fundamental tone difference which really affects how the action plays out and what role the action has in the movies. In Winter Soldier, I think that the action tends to be a lot more visceral and impactful and serious, whereas in Guardians, I feel as though a lot of the action sequences are played for spectacle and for laughs.
Yeah, a lot of them are the butts of jokes, like the gold people, their whole remote-controlled drones thing. That was really neat. It's oh yeah, these fleet of drones that are shooting a barrage of bullets at them. They're just a video game on their home planet that they get really intense about.
The crash of the Milano, when you have Drax basically hanging out the back. That's an action sequence that's played for laughs that I think kind of pushes Guardians into the more cartoony action category, where you're like, yes, Drax is an alien, yes, he's supposed to be really tough and have really tough skin, but he's hanging out the back of a spaceship that's crashing through a forest at I don't know how many 100 miles an hour. It doesn't have that same level of realism that the action in some of the other movies, say the Winter Soldier, has.
I felt like, comparatively to the first one, the movie was just a lot less grander. Because the first one, they go to a lot of different planets, as I recall. It's a real journey that they go on together, forming their group. But this one, I guess it feels like an episode out of their being hired to do something. In terms of the actual cinematography, I thought Guardians 1 was really weird. It had a lot of interesting choices in terms of stuff would be in the background, plot important stuff that you'd actually have to pay attention to, which in any other movie, they're just background details. And in Guardians 2, I guess they got a different director, because I didn't really find any of that.
Nope, same writer and director.
Oh, really?
Yep.
It felt more like a generic summer blockbuster. It wasn't really that kind of thing where you really had to pay attention.
Waj, I wonder if you're feeling about Guardians 2, just how, like you say, it feels more normal and kind of like the stereotypical blockbuster. I'm wondering if that's also partly because Guardians 1 was so different, even within the MCU, whereas now at this point, we've gotten 2 to 3 years more Marvel movies, and we've gotten things like Doctor Strange, and now this is the second Guardians movie, so a lot of the concepts that were introduced originally, a lot of this kind of expanding of the Marvel Universe doesn't feel as fresh, doesn't feel as new anymore, so maybe that kind of filters down into all of the different aspects of the movie, and makes you feel like overall things don't seem as interesting and original as the first movie was. Is that kind of it?
I guess so. Like, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen the other Marvel movies, but yeah. But I felt like a lot of the plots weren't really that interesting. There's like that whole part with Yondu and Rocket that I felt like there were a lot of good gags, I thought, with that. They're like captured by the mutinous crew that Yondu has.
Taserface.
Yeah, Taserface. That's the one gag. And then there's like the Groot gag with him like getting a bunch of different items. I thought went on for a bit too long, but it was still alright, I guess. And then, of course, the glorious arrow scene where he's just stabbing everyone.
That's actually one scene that I kind of have a bit of a problem with in this movie, just because of what it does to the characters, in the sense that that scene is probably just in there because everybody reacted really well to the first arrow scene in the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. The thing is, I feel as though Yondu basically killing all of his former crewmates in cold blood with no chance to offer them any kind of way to fight back. He's basically just stabbing them without them knowing. I feel as though it kind of mars Yondu's character. And, like, it doesn't make it seem heroic. He doesn't seem in any way like a hero.
I'd argue that he's not meant to be a hero. None of them are heroes. They just happen to be doing heroic things. Like, maybe the most heroic of the characters, Peter, him, and maybe Groot are the most heroic out of all the Guardians of the Galaxy. But that's their shtick, is that they're morally gray.
And Yondu is even grayer than they are.
Exactly.
I guess, yeah.
He's not really meant to be a hero. None of them really are. They're like the better Suicide Squad.
Yeah, like Yondu maybe has a conscience somewhere, and obviously deep down he cares about Peter, but he's also a pirate, and he's obviously lived a pretty seedy life. I don't think it's at all out of character for him to take the mutiny as an unforgivable betrayal and just not have a problem with killing all of his crew.
I guess so, because then they established beforehand that all the people who actually were loyal to him were thrown out of an airlock.
Yeah.
I guess seeing it like that, it's kind of understandable, but it doesn't make us root for him necessarily. But I don't know. Maybe that's just
like
me.
at that point, he hasn't had his redemption. Like, he has a whole heart-to-heart moment with Rocket at some point after, where he's like, oh yeah, we're the same, basically. Before that, we weren't necessarily rooting for him. The main plot is that Peter, his father, he finds him and he's like, oh yes, I am basically a god and I have the power to create this planet. The actual thing with him, where he's like, oh, he's looking for his kin that has the celestial genes, it felt kinda contrived. I thought, that whole plot line. He says that he got bored of his powers, and so he went and searched for life outside the galaxy and planted his seeds everywhere. But it's like, it's just so strange that then, okay, so he's looking for another one of his kind to just double the rate of that expansion. I guess, sure, like, if he just has nothing else to do, it's like, oh yeah, sure, I mean, that's my grandiose plan, but it didn't really feel that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think his motives were not very fleshed out. However, I think he's still better than most of the other Marvel villains because he has an actual personal connection to the characters.
It was nice that they actually had a family connection. It expands the character background. The whole reveal thing, how he was the one that put a tumor in Peter Quill's mother, and like that is the reason that he retaliates. And I'm like, really? Did you have to mention that?
I think it works.
I mean, it works logically, but it just felt a bit contrived.
Yeah, it's cheesy and it's cliched, but it's a Marvel movie. It's not high art.
When I watched the movie, that didn't seem particularly odd to me. His logic behind it was to separate himself from her, right?
Yeah, it was kind of weird. He was like, oh yes, I really loved her, and if she was still alive, I would have gone a fourth time back to Earth, and that would have been far too many, and so I had to kill her, because that makes sense.
I mean, it makes sense to a minor deity, where, I don't want to be tempted by this, so I'm just going to completely remove it from my life. It It's like if you were to say, oh, I don't want to eat bananas anymore, and then you said, well, I'm gonna stop bananas. But instead of stopping eating all the bananas, what a minor god would do would say, I'm just going to eliminate all bananas in the world. No more bananas.
The whole climax with all the planets, having the blue flower spread, like I didn't feel anything for that. It was like not impactful at all.
It destroyed a Dairy Queen.
Oh yeah,
How
that's
can you
right.
not be
Yeah.
upset that it destroyed a Dairy Queen? Have you no heart?
Yeah, I felt no twinge of emotion for the desolation of the Dairy Queen. I don't even like Dairy Queen anyway.
Heretic.
You heathen.
Heretic.
Baskin Robbins for life. I did like the fact that there was more backstory given to Nebula, how Gamora and her used to spar as kids, and every time she'd lose, Thanos would replace part of her body with machinery to like even the odds between them. I thought that was really good in terms of setting stuff up for Thanos in later movies, Infinity War, and I suppose Guardians of the Galaxy 3. There's a scene that I really liked, which was Gamora sitting on the surface of Ego. It's like a deserted place. It was a tranquil area, and it gets interrupted by Nebula just like hurling bullets at her.
Yeah, it's great.
I like how psychopathic she is. At the same time, she gets emotional, and it's because of that past experience with her as a child.
I felt like it was a bit of a heel-face turn with her being so psychopathically determined to kill her sister and then to turn around and help her sister immediately. It wasn't that bad, but I still feel like it felt a little fast.
Yeah, I think I agree. And actually, I think that probably explains a problem that I had, which was that I really liked the scene where Nebula explains her backstory, but then I never really cared that much about the plotline between her and Gamora.
I actually really liked the Gamora-Nebula relationship, and perhaps in retrospect, maybe it feels a bit rushed, but I actually found myself being a lot more invested in their dynamic than I was even in Ego and Peter. Like, it's probably because I already knew that Ego was Ego the Living Planet going into this movie, but very little about that particular plot line surprised me, and for some reason it failed to connect with me, but something about Nebula's hatred of Gamora that I think that they do actually find a kind of reconciliation near the end, and maybe it's a bit rushed, but I think that it is fairly powerful that she eventually finds this kind of acceptance.
The idea is good, but I would argue that it was so rushed that it undermined whatever actual power it could really have. Maybe I'm overstating my case a bit. It wasn't terrible or anything.
Speaking of relationships between characters, I thought that the dynamic between Mantis and Drax was actually pretty interesting, where, you know, with a team you have obviously the dynamic between Peter and Gamora, and then you have Rocket and Groot, and then you're like, oh, here's this new female member who speaks literally and who's obviously going to get set up with Drax, and then Drax is just very blatantly like, no, I find you hideous. And you know that he's not like lying or anything like that, because he doesn't. Even at the end when he's like, you are beautiful.
On the inside.
On the inside.
You know, they're not like an actual romantic relationship. It's much more for setting up the gags.
I actually saw it more as kind of setting up Mantis as almost a daughter figure for Drax, because we know, like, from the first movie that his wife and his daughter were brutally murdered, and so Drax is living with a lot of that pain inside him, right? And there's that really touching scene where we see Mantis kind of basically be Drax's emotional outlet. And I think that in a couple of their scenes together, you maybe see that Mantis is filling this young, naive, inexperienced daughter role for Drax, as somebody who Drax can look out for and potentially care for and mentor.
Yeah, no, there definitely is a relationship between them. I was just noting how, for the audience, you're expecting it to be set up as a romantic relationship when in fact it is not. And that's something that I haven't seen very many movies, so I'm sure it's been done a million times, and John will tell me the times it's been done a million other times before, but I thought it was interesting.
16 Candles, there's a scene where this one kid is trying to impress this girl, and then they end up having a heart-to-heart talk and end up just being friends. That's all I got.
That's not the same thing, though. Anyway, it's a unique enough concept, I feel like.
A lot of the shots I felt like would make very good desktop backgrounds. Like, I don't know, there was some really pretty imagery that they had. I was just like, this was shot to be a poster. I don't know if you guys felt that way.
I totally get what you you mean. Even though maybe we're having a hard time thinking about the deeper aspects of Guardians, we're trying to analyze like the characters and the plot lines. Maybe on a certain level, that's not really what this movie is about. Like, yes, it's about the characters and kind of how they uniquely riff off each other, but I feel like such a huge part of this movie is the visuals. And that's something that's a little bit hard to analyze. But I remember thinking about one of my big takeaways from this movie, even though kind of like you, Waj, I felt as though it was a little bit generic, maybe a little bit samey, especially when compared to the first Guardians movie. The visuals were just crazy. It's so colorful, so much stuff going on, and they're really pushing what they can do with these big Marvel movie budgets and this massive, colorful galaxy spanning story.
Yeah, like there's that whole sequence where Rocket and Yondu are like hopping between 100 or so galaxies. They all contorted.
Oh gosh,
and
yeah.
rainbow colored. They kind of melt into colors.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Yondu and how he is Mary Poppins, y'all. Rest in peace, Yondu.
Yep. He's dead.
In a lot of Marvel movies, a character dies, and then that's that. They're dead, the impact is done. With Yondu's death, you do have that funeral at the end, where it really hits it home as far as the impact that it makes, because, you know, it's one thing to see a character die on screen, and like, no, and then it moves on. It's another thing to kind of go back and revisit that.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, it's some really good parallelism, I thought, how this movie is about the relationship between Peter and his father. Essentially, at the end, both of his fathers kind of die. His metaphorical father figure in Yondu and Ego. That's some nice stuff that they got there, you know? It actually connects in some fashion.
I want to give a shout out to the best character in the movie, this guy who has 2 lines. He's played by Ben Browder, who was the lead actor on Farscape, which is basically what you would get if you turned Guardians of the Galaxy into a TV show.
What are his 2 lines?
I don't remember.
Doesn't he say something related to the whole Adam post-credits scene? Isn't he in that?
I don't think so, no.
Oh, yeah, speaking of which, I actually didn't stay for the post-credit scenes.
Come on, watch, there were 5! There were 5
okay,
of them!
I know, I'd heard, but again, with all the movies that I watch with my family, and my family was just like up and ready to go, you know, and I would not be able to convince them to stay. So what were they actually like?
There were too many.
Yeah. It's basically like an epilogue to the story where you have teenage Groot, which was too fast. I didn't think that was necessary. It's either a really large time jump or Groot grows exceedingly fast.
What did you guys think of Baby Groot?
They didn't really give him that much to do.
He can't really do that much. He's like half a foot tall.
That's true.
For what it's worth, I probably laughed more at the teenage Groot scene than I did at almost anything Baby Groot did in the whole movie. Hey Slime, what did you think of the music in this movie?
I thought that it was very 80s. I didn't think any of it was particularly great. I didn't think any of it was particularly terrible.
Boo. Also, it was all 70s music.
I think that if I had recognized the songs, it would have made more impact, but because I don't know any 80s music, I just listened to pretend 80s music, it didn't make as big of an impact.
In closing, Guardians 2 is a movie that I enjoyed a lot. I think that there was a lot of fun stuff in it. It's not one of the deeper or more thought-provoking Marvel movies, but it's a fun romp, and I think that overall I can look past its flaws and just spend 2 hours enjoying it.
Yeah, definitely is quite a fun movie.
I would say this is possibly the best Marvel movie, personally.
Even better than Guardians 1.
I have to watch it again, I'm not sure.
Goodbye, everyone.
Mary Poppins, y'all.
Yes, you are.